Hey, Breathe family. Welcome to another Breathe Pulse. The pulse is what keeps us all together until that wonderful day when we can actually be together again. I'm Reverend Carly, and I'm here to give you an astrological report on Venus retrograde in Gemini. And before we're finished, I'm also going to take you through a guided meditation. I'd like to begin this evening's broadcast with a personal story because this is Breathe, and I can do that. And for the longest of times, I've been wanting to tell you all that when I began my career as a flight attendant last fall, that I kept it at the forefront of my mind that I stand on the shoulders of giants. And it is because that you are in my life that I'm able to achieve greatness. And even though I don't get to see you or talk to you all the time, my Breathe family really is at the forefront of my mind on a daily basis. So I'm happy to be with you here tonight. And before we get into Venus retrograde in Gemini directly, I'd like to lay a little bit of the astrological groundwork of the things that have been happening lately. This week on its own was a bit of a game changer for life here on Earth. And I feel like nothing happens in isolation, so why not round out the picture? All right, so just this week, Jupiter and Saturn both went retrograde. And in my personal experience, these two planets have a lot to do with forward motion of major things in our lives here on Earth. So let's start with Saturn. Saturn recently made its way into the sign of Aquarius. And the perfect example of Saturn in Aquarius is everyone having to go into quarantine. Because Aquarius is the sign of large groups, and Saturn pulls up blocks. Yay! Now he's going backwards, so hopefully he'll get out of Aquarius before the end of July. I promise he will. Saturn is retrograding back into the sign of Capricorn, where he has spent the last 2.5 years transiting. And this retrograde motion is giving us all an opportunity to go back and to make sure that our own foundational groundwork is sturdy enough to move forward full speed ahead for the rest of our lives. Saturn rules Capricorn, and those two things together want discipline and integrity, basically. It's a lot of hard work, but if you don't do what Saturn says, which is one of my favorite games to play as an astrologer, you will only have to work harder. So you might as well work hard on the front end instead of on the back end. Jupiter also went retrograde this week in the sign of Capricorn. For this report, I actually had to do a lot of digging on what Jupiter and Capricorn is because all of the textbooks and the dominant rhetoric is that Jupiter and Capricorn is just hard work. And I happen to disagree with that because since coronavirus became a real thing and we've all gone into quarantine, there have been a multitude of silver linings. And Jupiter being in Capricorn is the reason that there are silver linings because Jupiter's job is to sprinkle a little fairy dust on it. Jupiter also rules our belief systems, and he happens to magnify everything that he touches. So Jupiter going backwards in Capricorn is going to help us to get clear on the things that we think in order to move forward again. So while you're not supposed to necessarily stop working on the things that you want to see happen, what you will see is that when these two planets go forward in the fall is when things will really start to fall into place for you. And up until that point, it's kind of just doing the nitty-gritty work to make sure that it's good to go until then. And it's all in Capricorn, so it's a lot of hard work. Duh. All right, so on May 5th, the nodal axis shifted into Gemini and Sagittarius. The North and South node take 20 plus months to travel through a sign. So it's just over a year and 8 months. And what the North and South node do is they put a collective focus on something. In your own chart, the North node, I like to think of it as a magnet, and it looks like a magnet. It shows your karmic destiny. where you're supposed to go if you're actually doing your soul growth in this life. The South Node, I like to think of it as a leaf blower, is disseminating energy. In your personal chart, it's not bad, as a lot of people say it is. What it is the skills that you came in with and the place where you might fall down on yourself when you don't want to move towards your North Node. Transiting North and South Node put a focus on those areas of our life for everyone. So, the North Node is in Gemini, the same place where Venus is retrograding. So what is Gemini? Gemini is anything that you can throw a stick at. It is your current environment. Gemini rules your quarantine mates, the people who are in your close proximity. It is not necessarily breathe until we come together and we are all there at Stable Studios. Gemini is ruled by Mercury. It's a quick moving sign. It likes communication, but a lot of talk, not necessarily deep talk, which is Sagittarius. Sagittarius is more like foreign travel and higher learning and broadcast. So in Sagittarius, we're really just chatting it up kind of for chit-chat's sake. Being that Gemini is ruled by Mercury, it also rules the mind, how we think and how we communicate. If you look at your third house or where Mercury is in your chart, you will see how you intake information as well as what you need to communicate. Other things Gemini rules are our aunts, uncles, cousins, and the town we grew up in. Gemini is the sign of the twins. So they are Castor and Pollux. Gemini is known for being a superficial sign, but the actual quest, when we get into that sign, as the two constellations will show you, one is fading while the other is growing brighter. So when we're in Gemini, the goal is to allow our soul drives to take over as opposed to making our decisions on keeping up with the Joneses, which is what the ego would have us do. There's a little bit of Gemini. There's more. Mercury right now is also in Gemini, and Venus is in Gemini. Venus rules our values. She rules Taurus and Libra. So anyone who has Taurus or Libra as one of their sun, moon, or rising, this is going to be an important transit for you, even though because Venus rules our values, it's important to everyone. So in Taurus, Venus is showing us the type of furniture that we keep in our house and the type of clothes that we like to wear on our body. But more importantly, values, right? The type of things that I value to put in my house or to put on my body ultimately shows how I think of myself. So Venus just went from being a superficial sign, planet, to being in charge of our confidence, which means that as Venus rolls backwards through Gemini, we're going to be getting some tests on what is it that we need to feel confident in different situations. Venus also rules Libra, and in Libra, she rules our close, intimate relationships, which doesn't necessarily have to be the ones that we're in romantic relationship with. It is, like Gemini, our close one-to-one intimate relations. So Venus going retrograde in Gemini is very much a here and now transit where we're going to be asked to take a look at the people that we surround ourselves by and to decide, are they really who we want to take with us into the future? Venus in Gemini is flirty. She's the girl or guy who can tell you who in the room is the best kisser because she knows. She is great dinner party company because she knows how to keep the conversation alive, but she does not want to crack the surface. She will be found wearing What are they? Arm floaties clinging to the shallow end of the pool, and she will do whatever she can in her power to deter you from having a deep conversation. If you have Venus retrograde in your chart or Venus and Gemini in your chart, and you're here watching this, I'm sure you have other things in your chart to offset that. And I know plenty of spiritual people who also have Venus and Gemini. It just means that they are great conversationalists. But this is important because as Venus rolls through Gemini, we're not going to want to be having those serious conversations until May 29th, when Mercury, the ruling planet of Gemini, douses himself into the emotional waters of Cancer, where we'll be having emotional thoughts and Venus and Gemini thinking about our emotions. During this entire retrograde period, Venus is also square to Neptune. This is where it really gets fun. So, Venus and Neptune both rule love. Venus is jealous. She rules earthly love, and you can knock her off her horse pretty quickly because, as I said before, she can be shallow. Neptune, on the other hand, rules divine love, and when these two come together, it is like you met Prince Charming. Except during a Venus retrograde, if you meet Prince Charming, you want to step, walk, and run in the opposite direction because he's not. Venus square Neptune, whenever these two planets come together, it is like a divine love. Or it can be highly imaginative and a super increase of our sensitivities because that's what Neptune is. Neptune is a planet who diffuses things, and people who have a lot of Neptune energy in their chart walk into a room and they're like the psychic sponge who's picking up everyone's emotions. My idea with Venus retrograde squaring Neptune is saying these things that we have chosen to be an illusion about in our lives already. As she goes through this retrograde, she's pulling back the curtain, and we're seeing just who really that Wizard of Oz is on the loudspeaker, who we thought was Prince Charming in the first place. It doesn't have to be love. This can be in any part of your life. You can think that this job was all that, or this town was all that. And as Venus goes into retrograde, you're going to start seeing like, oh, here's the forest for the trees. Okay, we've made it. Venus retrograde. So, Venus rules our values. She rules our relationships. She rules beauty. When she goes retrograde, it's time to rethink all of that. And just because a planet of retrograde is retrograding does not mean that it's necessarily bad. It can mean a redo, or it can mean old friends coming into your life. It can be old lovers coming into your life. It can be the resurfacing of projects that we've given up on. There is a mythological story that goes along with Venus's retrograde journey. I'd like to tell it here quickly because it is by far one of my favorites, and I think that it is the perfect anecdote for what it is that we're experiencing at this time. So, back in the day, there were a Nana and a Rishkagul, and they were sisters. And for some reason, Inanna is the queen on high, and Erishkigal is the goddess of the underworld. For some reason, Inanna decides that she's going to go visit her sister, Erishkigal, in the underworld. And she gets to the first gate, and she knocks, and the gatekeeper shows up, and they're like, hey, what are you doing here, goddess on high? And she's like, well, I'm the goddess on high, and I'd like to visit my sister, Erishkigal, in the underworld. And the gatekeeper is like, well, she's my queen, so I'm just going to go check with her first. She's like, cool. The gatekeeper goes to Erishkigal and says, hey, your sister's at the door. Can I let her in? And Erishkigal's pissed. She's like, what? We did not get along as children. She's the pretty one. She gets to be up there. I'm down here. Sure, let her in. But give her the sacred rights. And he goes, oh, yeah. All right. So he goes back to the first gate. There are 7, one to correlate with each chakra that we have. And he says, all right, Inanna, you can come in. And he opens the first gate, and as she steps in, he rips off her crown. And he says, and no more going to work for you because you're not an essential employee and you're basically in the underworld now. She's like, what are you doing? And he responds, the ways of the underworld are perfect, Inanna, and they are not to be questioned. She's like, all right. And they move on to the 6th gate. He unlocks the 6th gate. She walks in. He rips off her earrings and he says, and you have to wear a face mask the entire time you're down here. And she's like, what? And he's like, the ways of the underworld are perfect, Inanna, and they are not to be questioned. She's like, okay. They move forward to the 5th gate. At the 5th gate, she walks through. He rips off her necklace and says, and you can't go outside and play with your friends anymore. The ways of the underworld are perfect, and they are not to be questioned. They go through all 7 gates, and by the time she gets to her sister's throne room, she's naked and humiliated. And her sister says, hey, thanks for coming. You've officially landed in the place where all who enter don't get to leave, and you are not different than any of them. Ereshkigal hangs her sister on a hook and leaves her there to rot. Except Inanna's the goddess on high, and she is an essential employee. And while she was stuck in the underworld, life on Earth began to grow dim and dull, and everything stopped to grow. Now, all of those who did not join her on this underworld journey were smart enough to know that you can't just go down there and come back. So they had to devise a plan to get Inanna back. So Earth Mother created 2 dirt moles to send down to get Inanna. The dirt moles make it through all 7 gates, and they get to Ereshkigal's throne room, and they greet her. And she says, you want Inanna back? And they're like, yes, please. And she's like, why? They're like, we don't know. She's the goddess on high. We'd like to have her back so that the sun will shine. And Ereshkigal goes, but I'm stuck down here in the underworld. And these dirt moles reply, oh, you're stuck down here in the underworld. She goes, and I couldn't get fast food takeout even when we weren't in quarantine. And they go, oh, and you couldn't get fast food takeout even when you weren't in quarantine. She goes, and I'm tired of homeschooling my kids. And they go, oh, you're tired of homeschooling your kids. And it went on like this until Ereshkigal felt like she was heard. And because she was heard, she was pleased. And she allowed Inanna to go back through the 7 gates to be the goddess on high, to rule again. Now, the moral of that story is that during a Venus retrograde, it is not our job to try and fix, shame, or dilute, square Neptune, the things that are coming up for us. All you have to do is see them. And you don't even have to act on them until Venus starts going forward again at the end of June, at which point you'll probably want to. The thing is, with Venus in Gemini, these are both superficial things. And as we know, anything that exists on the surface still has deep roots. But it's inconvenient to change our everyday realities, so as humans, we're more likely to make a decision to ignore what our inside voice is telling us than to act on it. And Venus goes retrograde every other year so that we can make sure our inside voice is given a loudspeaker so we have the chance to make the corrective changes necessary. Because it's not about the time that we have invested, it's about the time that we have left. Okay, I'd like to discuss some do's and don'ts of a Venus retrograde. Haircuts. Venus rules beauty, and I think it's really funny that we've all been in quarantine, and now the doors in some places are kind of opening, because one of the last things you want to do before June 25th is get your hair cut. And while you might be happy that it does get cut, you might not be happy with the way it looks when it's done. Haircuts. Don't get haircuts. You don't want to start a new relationship. No first dates. You will regret it. You will get burned. You don't want to start a new job. You don't want to sign contracts, and you don't want to make any major purchases during this time because you will regret it. I don't know what it is, but we're just not seeing things clearly. And given the fact that she is squared to Neptune, means that the little glitz and glamour is all the shinier, and we're going to be like moths led to the flies. Moths to the light. Sorry. It's a test. It really is a test. And I would highly recommend putting a big red line through the rest of June for all of the things that I mentioned above, particularly dating and new jobs. Okay, so you also don't want to launch a new product during this time, which means that this is a good time to go back. Venus also rules business. Look at your business plan, look at your products that you have to do, and get ready to move forward in July, which will also be eclipse season, so things will kind of be in your favor for moving forward. But now's the time to boost your position without bringing your product to market. And just in case you want to have cosmetic surgery, now is not the time to do it. This is a good time to resell items, but I don't think you should really think about purchasing anything major. I've said that once already. Also, I feel like now is a good time, especially since Jupiter and Saturn are also retrograde, to look around your life and be like, what do I need to feel more confident? Because that's kind of what the story is playing out to say. It's like, what do you need in your life to feel authentic and confident in that authenticity? Also, if you haven't already, I would highly recommend using this time to work on your low buy, no buy budget, because that's really fun. I mean, we're already in quarantine, but Venus wants us to get in touch with our values, which is also our finances. Think about it. I think I have some chats. Let me just check that. Okay. No, we're good. All right. So if there aren't any questions, I would like to lead you all through a brief guided meditation. To give you as a tool, takeaway tool for this Venus retrograde. I should have brought sunglasses because I don't really want to close my eyes. But all right, close your eyes if you're watching this, and imagine that you have roots growing out like tiny little shoots through the bottom of your feet and out through the bottom of your seat. And imagine that these tiny little roots are growing outward and downward through the floorboards. They're cracking through the pavement, and they've made their way through the basement, and they are pushing their way politely past the worms. And these roots, which are all your own, are growing outward and downward until they are planted into the molten hot lava core of this egg-shaped planet. And when you reach this place, take the thoughts that are swirling around your head, encapsulate them, send them down through this root system which you have just created, and in silent prayer, ask Mother Earth to show you what you need to know. And if you just sit with this for a minute, you will get an answer. was kind of brief. Okay, so I suggest using that throughout this Venus retrograde. Another tool that I'd like to give you with is pillow talk. Because this transit is so much affecting our reality, I found that when my inside voice has things to say, I can tell myself a million different things throughout the day. But what comes to me right as I'm about to go to bed at night or right as I wake up in the morning, whatever exists in my headspace at that time, I know to be my truth. And if I want to tell myself stories throughout the rest of the day, I will. And that's why I call pillow talk important. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I should say about this Venus retrograde. Everyone, this is a breathe pulse if you're just tuning in. I'm almost done, unless I can think of one more thing. It's a big time. Thanks, Jackie. Yeah, just to reiterate one more time, a Venus retrograde, which happens from May 13th through June 25th, it's important because it's about getting clear on our values. And this Venus retrograde in Gemini is asking us to get clear on who and what we value in our environment. If we have to go in quarantine again next winter, do we want to take the same people with us? And I'm sure now that we've been locked indoors with people, we probably have a pretty good idea of whether or not we want to spend more intimate time with them. Other than that, thank you so much for having me. When would be a better astrological time to buy a house? Oh, that's a good question. July. Are you looking to buy a house? Are there any other questions, friends? I'm glad you're here. If not, thanks for having me. Follow BreatheFest on all the socials. I'm so sorry I won't get to see you at Stable Studios this year. Remember, keep up with the pulse, because it's what's keeping us together, and I'm really grateful to whoever came up with that genius idea, because it's awesome. Thank you, good night.